In this season of Life Groups, we're talking about asking better questions. What we know is if we can stop and pause in life and ask some better questions, we'll make better decisions. And if we make better decisions, then we'll live with fewer regrets. And so across the course of this season, we've been offering some better questions for us to ask. And today we want to talk about the maturity question. To talk about that question, I want you to go back in time a little bit. Think about what it was like when you were 18 years old. When you were 18 years old, if you were like me, you were the smartest person in the room at all times. It didn't matter who else was in the room. You were smarter than your parents. You were smarter than your teachers, smarter than everyone. And not just that, but you took a lot of risks. You did a lot of things that were irrational. You lived a lot right on the edge between good and bad, between life and death sometimes, because that's what you did when you were 18 years old. But an amazing thing happens, really a remarkable thing happens by the time you get to be about the age 25. When you get to the age 25, your brain completes its development. The prefrontal cortex completes its development. And suddenly all that irrationality, all that risk-taking begins to disappear. You live life more mature. You live life with more wisdom. You make fewer bad decisions simply because your brain taps the brakes before you make bad decisions. And here's the interesting thing. When we read scripture, we hear a lot about a life lived with wisdom, a life lived with fewer bad decisions. In fact, Paul calls us to maturity in all of his letters. And in one letter in particular, he talks about the mature life, what's required of us to live that way, to set aside bad decisions. And this is what he says, Ephesians 5, verses 15 and 16. Be careful then how you live, not as unwise people, but wise, making the most of time because the days are evil. Making the most of time. Every one of us is given this limited amount of time. Paul calls us to make the best of it. In order to make the best of it, he calls us to make wise decisions, not unwise decisions. And so the maturity question that we have to ask at times is, what is the wise decision? And that's an important question to ask, because notice it doesn't ask, where can I get more information about this decision? It doesn't say, what's the right thing to do here? It pushes beyond all of that to what is the wise thing to do. Wisdom takes all of our knowledge, all of the information that we've gathered, and even our concepts of right and wrong, and puts them together, and in the moment allows us to make a decision that is wise for that moment in life. In the book, Better Decisions, Fewer Regrets, Andy Stanley expands on the question of wisdom, and this is what he asks. He says, in light of my past experience, my current circumstance, and my future hopes and dreams, what is the wise thing for me to do? Making decisions requires us to think back to our past experiences. It calls us to take into account what's going on in our lives right now and what we hope will happen in our lives in the future. So let's break that down real quick. Past decisions. When I do premarital counseling, one of the things I tell the young couple is always, you live in the ruts that other people have dug for you. Those are ruts about finances, communication, how we treat other people, how we see the world, how we react when we're stressed. Those are ruts that other people have dug for us. And sometimes they're even ruts that we've dug for ourselves. And it means that we have to take into account our past experiences. How are those ruts impacting us? How do they impact our decision making? My parents divorced when I was a young adult. Often when I face conflict with my spouse, that past experience comes back to haunt me because I will avoid conflict, because I don't want to damage the relationship, even when we need to have that conflict. In life, if we're going to make wise decisions, we have to acknowledge what our past was, acknowledge it, and own it for what it was. And then we have to take into account our current situation, our current circumstances. A lot of times when we're reacting, when we're talking to people, when we're making decisions, we're really making decisions out of what's happening in our heart and our lives right now. If we're struggling at work, if we're in a disagreement with a family member, if the car is broken down and you're under financial stress, all of that will play into your decision-making process. It will impact the wisdom that you can bring. It may even limit the wisdom that you bring. And so you have to, if you're going to make wise decisions, you have to acknowledge what's going on right now. How is that impacting the wisdom that I'm bringing to a decision? And then the third part of it is what do we hope for? What do we dream about in the future? So often we forget about what we want in life with our family, with our finances. Again, when I meet with young couples preparing to get married, one of the things I ask them to do is to prepare a budget. But the interesting thing that I ask them to do before they put numbers on the page for housing and debt and education, all those things, I ask them to set some financial goals. What do they hope to accomplish financially in the short term, in the midterm, and in the long term? Because every financial decision in their budget has to be a reflection of their hopes and dreams for their finances, for their life together. And sometimes we forget about that part, and we don't think about what's coming in the future, and we make decisions that don't point us toward the future that we desire, that we're called to live to. Years ago, I met with a man after he had lost his marriage. He had done something that really hurt his wife and his kids, and he had deep regret about it. And this is what he shared. He shared, I had no idea. I never thought that my children could hate me. I never thought I'd have to wonder if I would get to walk my daughter down the aisle at her wedding. He had all these dreams for his kids and ultimately his grandkids that he had lost because he made an unwise decision in the moment. When we're making decisions, what is the wise thing to do regarding your past, your present, and your future? Ask that question sometime, whether you're facing a major purchase, a conversation with your wife, dealing with something that your child has done. What's the wise thing to do right now? And let that guide you. Let that be a better question that leads you to fewer regrets.